me a true crime story.
Hey there, guys. Welcome to episode 14 of Tell Me a True Crime Story. I'm your host, Holly. Thank you guys so much for being here. I say that every time, but I really do mean it. This has been a dream of mine for a few years now, and I just started the podcast, I don't know, maybe September of 22, something in there. And, but I had wanted to do it since like maybe 2019. So I really thank all of you for being here and listening and, sticking with me through my wonky schedule, because the only thing that's been consistent about this podcast lately has been my inconsistency in getting new episodes out. And I'm trying to get them done as often as I can, and I'll be on a weekly schedule sometime in the near future. But in the meantime, thanks for being here with me and sticking it out with me. I hope that you and your family are happy, healthy, and safe. And just thanks for being here, guys. Thanks for listening. In the last episode, episode 13, She Tried to Get Away, I brought you the chilling story of Jessica Keene out of Columbus, Ohio. If you haven't listened to that one yet, go back and check it out. Please subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends and family about it, and follow the podcast on social media. Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok are at Tell Me a True Crime Story, and Twitter is at Tell Me a TCS Pod. I try to get pictures posted on there that are relevant to the episode and stuff like that. So also, please check out my other podcast, All Available Units Respond. So far, there are only 4 episodes on there. I haven't gotten to work on it as much as I want to, but I do plan to keep on posting episodes on there. So with all of that said, big hugs to all of you. And now let me tell you a true crime story. You may have heard this story before, but you probably haven't heard many of the troubling details surrounding this case and how the criminal justice system was just way too soft on this guy. You probably have never heard how he could have been locked up in prison for repeated felony drug violations, but instead he was always given chance after chance. If he'd been put away, he wouldn't have been out free, and he wouldn't have had the opportunity to commit the rape and murder that we'll discuss in this episode. You've probably also never heard before that this guy was suspected in that he is suspected in another murder 4 years prior to this one. So our story today takes place in Sarasota, Florida. Historical weather data for Sunday, February 1st, 2004, between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. shows that the weather was nice and the temperature was in the mid-60s. Carlie Jane Brucia was born on Monday, March 16, 1992 in Sarasota, Florida. At the time of her disappearance, she was only 11 years old, almost 12. She would have been 12 like the next month. And she was in the 6th grade at McIntosh Middle School. She loved going to the mall, and she loved the singer and actress Jennifer Lopez. Carlie had lots of friends. Carlie lived with her mom, Susan, and her younger brother. Her dad, Joseph Brucia Jr., lived in Belmore, New York, on Long Island. Her mom and dad had gotten a divorce in 1993 when she was just a baby. Carlie had a stepdad named Stephen Kanzler, and he'd been in her life since she was about 4 years old. However, at the time our story takes place, Carlie's mom and stepdad were separated, and he wasn't living with them. He'd moved out of the house about a month earlier. In the early evening on Sunday, February 1st, 2004, 11-year-old Carlie Brucia walked along normally busy Bee Ridge Road in Sarasota, Florida. But this wasn't just any Sunday. This particular Sunday was Super Bowl Sunday, and the streets of Sarasota were nearly deserted. The New England Patriots played the Carolina Panthers that Super Bowl Sunday in 2004. It's considered to this day to be one of the best Super Bowl games ever played. I'm guessing that it was a well-anticipated game in the area because many Florida residents are transplants from the Northeast and the Patriots were playing. There were probably many fans of the Patriots in the area, so as you can imagine, there weren't many people out driving around. Instead, they were hosting Super Bowl parties in their homes or attending them in friends' homes or in bars. Carlie had been at her friend Danielle's house when she decided to walk home. She'd had a sleepover at Danielle's with Danielle and another girl named Michelle the night before, which would have been Saturday. According to trial testimony in this case, the girls had gotten into a little bit of a squabble, and Carlie wanted to go home. Her stepdad, Stephen, was going to come get her, but he probably wasn't getting there fast enough for Carlie. Carlie was observed standing across the street from Danielle's house by Connie, Danielle's mom, as Connie was leaving to go somewhere. From her car, Connie used her cell phone to call her daughter, who was in the house, and ask her if it was okay for Carlie to walk home. That's when Connie learned that Stephen, Carlie's stepdad, was on his way to pick Carlie up. Carlie started to walk towards her home. She was wearing a red t-shirt and jeans and was carrying a pink backpack on her back. The time was about 6:15 p.m. Sunset was 6:11 p.m. that day in Sarasota. It would have been pretty dark within 20 to 30 minutes after that. During the 1-mile walk home from her friend's house, Carlie disappeared. She'd taken a shortcut through the back of a business she was very familiar with. There, she encountered a predator and would never make it home. The awful truth of Carlie's whereabouts would not be revealed until several days later. Meanwhile, at Carlie's house, her stepdad, Stephen, had just dropped off her little brother at the home Carlie shared with her brother and her mom, Susan. Susan asked Stephen to go pick up Carlie from her friend's house. It was about 15 minutes after 6 and it was still light outside. He drove the 1 mile to Danielle's house, but Carlie wasn't there. He thought maybe he'd passed her and just didn't see her, so he turned around and drove the route again, looking for her. He returned to Carlie's friend Danielle's house and asked Danielle and Michelle if they knew where Carlie was. They said she'd already left walking, and to their knowledge, she was headed home. Stephen continued to drive around looking for Carlie, visiting her friends in the area to see if they'd seen her. Susan called around to see if anyone had seen or heard from her, but Carlie was nowhere to be found. Around 7:30 p.m., Susan called 911 to report her 11-year-old daughter, Carlie Brucia, missing.
911, what's the location of the emergency?
My daughter is missing.
What's your address, ma'am? And your phone number? Okay. Has she been missing before?
No, she had a fight with her girlfriend. She decided to walk home. We've been driving around for about an hour and a half. And it's now an hour and a half walk. She's gone. We can't find her anywhere. I've called all her friends.
How old is she?
11.
And when was the last time that she was seen?
It was at 6 o'clock, Jan. Around 6 o'clock.
And she was at a friend's house?
Yeah.
Okay, what's her name, ma'am?
Carlie, C-A-R-L-I,
And last name?
Brucia, B-R-U-C-I-A. She's just shy of 5 feet.
Okay. Do you know how much she weighs?
She's around 120 pounds.
And what color hair does she have?
Dirty blonde.
And what color eyes?
Blue.
Stephen continued to drive around by himself, searching for his stepdaughter. At around 9:45 p.m., he got out of his vehicle with a flashlight and he looked for Carlie behind Evie's car wash. He probably knew that Carlie sometimes would take a shortcut through there. Stephen looked for Carlie or any sign of her for most of the night. The next day, he did not go to work and continued searching for Carlie. Police started looking for Carlie right away. Canines were brought in that night to assist in the search for her. That first night, police searched for Carlie for about 6 hours until about 3 a.m. A local and nationwide bolo went out for Carlie Brucia. Now, some of you guys may be asking why a be on the lookout went out for Carlie instead of an Amber Alert, and here's why. For an Amber Alert to be issued, certain criteria must be met. According to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the following 5 criteria must be met in order to issue an Amber Alert. The child is under the age of 18. Law enforcement has a well-founded belief based on an active investigation that a kidnapping has occurred. Law enforcement has a well-founded belief based on an active investigation that the child is in imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. There is a detailed description of the child and or the abductor or vehicle to broadcast to the public. The law enforcement agency of jurisdiction recommends activation. The reason in this case that an Amber Alert was not activated was because the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office did not have a detailed description of an abductor or an abductor's vehicle to broadcast to the public. There was no evidence of an abduction on that first night. The next day, Monday, February 2nd, 2004, the Sarasota County Investigations Bureau made the decision to bring scent dogs out to Bee Ridge Road in an attempt to locate Carlie. Wesley Waysham, who was then a firefighter and EMT for the DeSoto County Fire Rescue and also a volunteer with Sarasota K9 Search and Rescue, responded with a bloodhound named Ruby to Lalani Boulevard and Bee Ridge Road. Lalani Boulevard and Bee Ridge Road, that was the intersection where Carlie had started out walking. That's where her friend Danielle lived. Around noon, Wesley Waysham rubbed a pillowcase with Carlie's scent on it under Ruby's nose. Ruby was then given the find command. She led Wesley Waysham down Bee Ridge Road to Evie's Car Wash. Behind Evie's Car Wash, towards the corner of the building, Ruby began to circle continuously. Wesley Waysham testified at trial in this case that Ruby's circling indicated that this is where she lost Carlie's scent. Ruby showed no interest in going any further than that. Mike Evanoff, part owner of Evie's Car Wash, then went outside to see why police and search dogs were out behind his business. They let him know that there was a missing girl. Mike Evanoff told police that the car wash had closed around noon the day before, but the business had indoor and outdoor motion-activated cameras. He offered to go inside and check the prior evening's footage to see if the cameras picked up any sign of the missing child. He pulled up the footage from the evening before between 6 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. In the footage at 6:21 p.m., he watched as a man approached a young girl, took her by the wrist, and led her away. He immediately showed the investigators, who then took possession of the footage. This is a detailed description of what the camera caught on video that fateful Super Bowl Sunday in 2004. As Carlie walked behind Evie's car wash, she encountered a man about 20 feet directly in front of her. She kept walking and put her head down like she was trying to ignore him. He continued to approach her, walking toward her, straight on. She moved a little to her left to avoid him because he was still just walking straight towards her. When he was right in front of her, the stranger reached up with his left hand, palm open, to stop her and grabbed her around her upper right arm. Just before his hand grabs her arm, she shrinks back away from him a bit. She turned her body away from him a little too. He talked to her. She was just standing still. She said nothing. He put his right hand near or into his right pants pocket. He talked to her for about 7 to 8 seconds, in all likelihood threatening her, before he turned and started to walk away, pulling Carlie with him. His hand was now around her wrist. He led her away in the same direction he'd come from, the same direction she'd been walking in. This video is available all over the internet for you to watch for yourself. Investigators showed the video to Carlie's mom, Susan, who confirmed that the girl in the video was her daughter, Carlie. She could not, however, identify the man that approached Carlie and led her away. Investigators released the videotape to the media. They also issued an Amber Alert because now they had clear-cut evidence of a kidnapping and a description of her abductor. By Monday night, the FBI, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, known as the FDLE, and U.S. Marshals all got involved in the case and offered their assistance and resources to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office. By Tuesday morning, February 3rd, news outlets locally and nationally were playing the car wash abduction video over and over again. Police received 771 tips from the video footage, and 60 of those referenced a man named Joseph P. Smith. One man who saw the abduction video on the news recognized the abductor in the video as his co-worker. He recognized him by what he was wearing, a mechanic's uniform, by the tattoos on both of his arms, and by his gait, the way he walked. That man called the police and spoke to the detective in charge of Carlie's case. Investigators went to question the co-worker. He said that Joseph P. Smith was supposed to be at work that day, which was Tuesday, and he was not there. He also told them that Joseph P. Smith was not at work the day prior either, which would have been Monday. Now remember, Carlie was abducted on Sunday evening, just before 6:30 p.m. Detectives were still holding out hope to locate Carlie alive, so they found out where Joseph P. Smith lived from that co-worker, and they headed right over there. Joseph P. Smith was renting a room in the Kensington Park area of Sarasota from a man named Jeffrey Pincus. They made contact with Joseph P. Smith and asked him what he was doing on the evening of Super Bowl Sunday. Joseph P. Smith said he'd taken his brown Lincoln to visit his brother at his brother's house. The detective then asked him if he has tattoos. Joseph P. Smith asked the detective why he's being asked these questions, and they told him they were investigating the abduction of a child. Joseph P. Smith said he knew nothing about that. Then the detective showed him still photographs taken from the abduction video. Joseph P. Smith acknowledged that the man in the video looked like him, but said that it was not him. He gave the detectives permission to search his car and his room. They found no sign of Carlie or of her having been there, but they did find spoons used to melt drugs in and a syringe. Therefore, they were able to arrest Joseph P. Smith for violation of probation and possession of drug paraphernalia. So, who was Joseph Peter Smith? He was an auto mechanic and had 3 daughters. He was born in Brooklyn, New York on March 17, 1966. He battled depression and drug addiction for most of his life. He started doing drugs at a young age and said he was a heroin addict by the age of 19. He also took other drugs like cocaine, crack, speed, and prescription opiate pain pills. He struggled with a crack addiction in New York in the 1980s and moved to Florida in 1991 to get a fresh start. In 1993, in Siesta Key, Florida, in an unprovoked attack, he smashed a woman in the head with a motorcycle helmet. He was sentenced to 60 days in jail. That same year, 1993, he overdosed and barely survived. The overdose put him in a coma for a period of time, and he was not expected to live. In 1997, he used a ploy and asked a woman to help him with his car that wouldn't start. But someone noticed he had a knife and called the cops. They found pepper spray and the knife on him, and they found his car in perfect working order. The car he was leading the woman to wasn't even his, but it was parked in a dark, remote spot. Joseph P. Smith only got a year of probation for that. He was arrested more than a dozen times in Florida, mostly for felony drug violations, but was always let off easy. He was allowed to plead no contest in exchange for probation, community supervision, house arrest, or drug rehab. Every time he fell off the wagon, the criminal justice system gave him another chance. Now, back to the investigation. A few hours after investigators searched the room Joseph P. Smith was renting and arrested him, Jeffrey and Naomi Pincus, the owners of the home where he rented the room, went to the sheriff's office. They asked for Detective Davis, who was in charge of Carlie's case. Jeffrey Pincus told Detective Davis that he recognized his tenant, Joseph P. Smith, as the man in the abduction video. He said that at 3 p.m. on Super Bowl Sunday, Joseph P. Smith asked to borrow his light-colored Buick station wagon. He said that he was going to use the car to go to the store to buy razors and he'd be back in 15 minutes. However, he did not return Jeffrey Pincus's station wagon until around 7 or 7:30 the next morning, which would have been Monday, February 2nd. Jeffrey Pincus said that when he got his car back, it was, quote unquote, a little messy, and the back seat was laid down flat. Jeffrey Pincus then relinquished his car to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office for forensic analysis. Detectives then went back to Evie's car wash to view video footage from before the abduction occurred. Sure enough, there on the video before the abduction of Carlie was a light-colored station wagon. As I mentioned earlier, the car wash had video cameras set up inside and outside of the business. Camera 5 caught the station wagon on film at 6:15 p.m., Camera 2 caught it at 6:18 p.m., and Camera 8 caught it at 6:19 p.m. Joseph P. Smith abducted Carlie on video at 6:21 p.m. The station wagon pulled into the car wash parking lot, circled around, went back out onto Bee Ridge Road, and slowed down, right where there was a turn into an alleyway that was right beside where Carlie was abducted. On Wednesday, February 4th, 2004, John Smith, who was Joseph P. Smith's brother, was interviewed by FBI agents working Carlie's case. John told them he'd received a call from his brother at about 8 p.m. on the night of Carlie's abduction. John said he'd refused to talk to his brother because they were not on good terms because his brother had recently stolen from him. He said that the next night, Monday, he and his girlfriend saw the abduction video on the news and they both recognized his brother, Joseph P. Smith, as being the man in the video. John explained to the FBI agents that he'd recognized his brother's face, hair, and the mechanic's uniform he was wearing. He said his girlfriend had noticed his distinctive gait due to him having had prior back surgery. He said that later that same night, his brother had shown up at their doorstep. He said he'd appeared to be under the influence of drugs, so he'd sent him away and did not talk to him. After that interview with FBI agents, John told them that he wanted to see his brother. Joseph P. Smith's public defender arranged a meeting between Joseph P. Smith, his brother, and their mom. This meeting took place the next morning, Thursday, February 5th, 2004. After 30 to 45 minutes, their mom exited the interview room crying. She did not say anything to law enforcement officials. John Smith stayed in the room with his brother an additional 30 minutes. When he came out of the interview room, he stated that his brother had come close to giving them information, but ended up not saying anything. The mother and brother left and were not questioned by law enforcement officials about their meeting with Joseph P. Smith. That same evening, Joseph P. Smith's brother, John, called the FBI agent from his cell phone and stated, quote, "I guess you heard. What do you want to do?" End quote. John Smith was under the assumption that his phone had been tapped by law enforcement when in fact it had not been. So it turns out that Joseph P. Smith had provided his brother, John Smith, with information about Carlie's murder and where he'd dumped her body. Based on the information from his brother, John Smith took investigators to Central Church of Christ on Proctor Road in Sarasota. Joseph P. Smith called his brother John Smith while they were all at the church. He'd said he'd had, quote-unquote, rough sex with Carlie and then strangled her. He gave his brother direction on where to find Carlie's body, which was located approximately 50 yards from a group of concrete blocks out in a wooded area of a field. Carlie's body was found naked below the waist except for a sock on her right foot. She was lying on her back with her right leg stretched out and her left leg bent back and curled under her left buttock. On her neck, a deep ligature mark was visible. John Smith then gave authorities a second statement. He admitted that he'd lied to them about the meeting with his brother when he stated that his brother, quote-unquote, came close to a confession, but ended up not saying anything about Carlie's disappearance or whereabouts. According to John Smith, his brother would not say anything about Carlie until their mother left the room. After she left, his brother told him that on the evening Carlie was abducted, he'd been high on cocaine and that everything that occurred that evening was a blur. He revealed that Carlie was in a field near a church on Proctor Road. Then John Smith had driven to the church to look for Carlie's body, but did not find it. Later that night, the brothers talked on the phone with each other, and John Smith told Joseph P. Smith that he'd been to the church but could not find Carlie's body. Joseph P. Smith told John that he'd engaged in a sex act with Carlie in the car and, quote unquote, it got carried away. John Smith asked his brother if he'd had sexual intercourse with Carlie, and he said yes. When John Smith asked if Carlie was dead, Joseph P. Smith responded, quote, I don't know, she could be, end quote. Dr. Vincent Vega, the Sarasota County medical examiner, performed an autopsy on Carlie's body. He determined that she died from strangulation. There was a ligature mark around her neck and no other evident injuries to her head or torso. The indentations on her neck could have been consistent with a shoelace used as a ligature. The marks on Carlie's neck were deeper in the front than in the back and appeared to crisscross in the back. This led Dr. Vega to conclude that the ligature was probably held in the perpetrator's hands while he was standing behind Carlie, strangling her. Dr. Vega explained during his testimony that if sufficient pressure is continuously applied that cuts off the blood supply to the brain, the victim would become unconscious within 8 to 10 seconds. Pressure must continue to be applied for an additional 2 to 4 minutes in order for death to result. Dr. Vega also testified that he believed that Carlie was conscious when the ligature was applied to her throat because there was no evidence of an injury that would have produced unconsciousness. Carlie's wrist had ligature marks which indicated that she'd been restrained. She had blunt force trauma to the inside of her right thigh and on her right shin, which were probably caused by a struggle between her and her perpetrator. Carlie's body had abrasions too, indicative of her having been dragged. Also, the positioning of her body when she'd been found indicated she'd been dragged. Her left leg had been bent back and curled under her left buttock. Based upon all available evidence to the medical examiner, he concluded that Carlie had been sexually battered. This evidence included statements made by Joseph P. Smith indicating that he'd sexually assaulted Carlie. Carlie's body was found naked from the waist down. Semen was present on the back of Carlie's red shirt. And according to Dr. Vega's court testimony, case reports and studies have demonstrated that ligature strangulations are most common in female victims and are highly associated with sexual batteries. Forensic testing showed that DNA contained in the semen sample taken from Carlie's shirt matched Joseph P. Smith's DNA profile. 2 hairs recovered from the station wagon that Jeffrey Pincus loaned to Joseph P. Smith the evening of the abduction were consistent with Carlie's hair. Furthermore, 7 fibers recovered from the station wagon were consistent with fibers in Carlie's red shirt. In November of 2005, Joseph P. Smith was found guilty of kidnapping, raping, and murdering 11-year-old Carlie Brucia. In March of 2006, based on a 10-2 recommendation by the jury, he was sentenced to death. However, since that sentencing, this case has taken many legal twists and turns. In 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that Florida's death penalty process was unconstitutional and that juries must unanimously recommend the death penalty. The Florida Supreme Court applied this requirement retroactively to cases going back to 2002. These decisions paved the way for Florida death row inmates to receive new sentencing hearings. In April of 2018, Florida Supreme Court justices voted 4-3 to throw out the death sentence of Joseph P. Smith. Then, in January of 2020, the state Supreme Court flip-flopped on its decision of the requirement of unanimous jury recommendation in death penalty cases. So, in April of 2020, Circuit Judge Charles Roberts reinstated the death penalty for Joseph P. Smith. Then in November of 2020, the state Supreme Court rejected the reinstatement of the death penalty in 2 similar cases, so the Florida Attorney General just remanded the case back to the trial court for resentencing. Joseph P. Smith was awaiting this resentencing when he died in prison on Monday, July 26, 2021. He was 55 years old. State Attorney of Florida's 12th Judicial Circuit, Ed Brodsky, released this statement about the death of Joseph P. Smith. Quote, "Our office was notified by the Attorney General's office this morning that Joseph P. Smith, DOC number 899500, died in the custody of the Florida Department of Corrections today. Smith was convicted of kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering 11-year-old Carlie Brucia in 2004. While nothing can bring Carlie back, we are grateful that her family, her friends, and the entire Sarasota community will finally have closure and will not have to endure any further court proceedings to bring Smith to justice." End quote. Joseph P. Smith's cause of death was never released, but he'd been a long-time drug user and had used drugs intravenously. Court records indicated he had hepatitis C, bipolar disorder, and depression. Maybe he died from complications due to hepatitis C or by suicide. Who knows? This is what Carlie's dad, Joseph Brucia Jr., had to say about the death of Joseph P. Smith. Quote, "The inept and corrupt criminal justice system could not get it done, so the natural order of things finally took care of it. I feel so let down by the system because Joseph P. Smith was on parole before he got to my daughter, and he was supposed to go back to jail for 5 years if he violated. He did violate. He was, quote, passed out with a bag of cocaine in a parking lot. Instead of them giving the consequence that they said they would, they gave him drug offender probation, which is just semantics, and that's why my daughter is not here today. Then they dragged this thing on from 2005 to 2021 and still going, and it's not even done yet. So I have a lot of venom and disdain for the criminal justice system." End quote. Joseph P. Smith has also been mentioned as a possible suspect in the murder of a woman in March of 2000, 4 years before Carlie was taken, raped, and killed. 25-year-old Tara Lee Riley was found naked, face down, dead in a retention pond behind Walmart on Cortez Boulevard in Bradenton, Florida. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement's website states that the case is still active and is being investigated by the Bradenton Police Department. Susan, Carlie's mom, really had a rough go of things. Susan's mom, who was Carlie's grandma, died at the age of 67, about a year and a half after Carlie was killed. Then Susan's 48-year-old brother, Carlie's uncle, died in a car accident 5 months after that. Then, a year after that, Susan's 9-year-old son, Carlie's brother, suffered serious head injuries in a car crash. Susan reportedly had a drug problem that had started before Carlie was killed, and she once told a judge that her drug problem and depression had raged since Carlie's murder. Sadly, Susan was found dead in Polk County, Florida, on April 10, 2017, at the age of 47 from a heroin overdose. There now stands a monument where Carlie's body was discovered on the grounds of the Central Church of Christ, only about 3 miles from where she was taken. On the stone monument is engraved a picture of Carlie and a beautiful poem that had been selected by Carlie's mom, Susan. The poem inscribed on the monument is titled "God's Lent Child" and reads, "I'll lend you for a little while a child of mine," God said. "I cannot promise she will stay, since all from earth return. And should thy angels call for her much sooner than we've planned, we'll brave the bitter grief that comes and try to understand." The monument sits on top of a little pond with lily pads and plants in it. A winding path leads up to the pond through a garden with ceramic angels, bunnies, dolphins, and wooden crosses along the way. Peaceful wind chimes are tied to wooden benches in the memorial garden. And that is the sad, sad case of Carlie Brucia. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tell Me a True Crime Story. Please subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends and family members about it. Share the podcast or share an episode that you loved, and follow on social media. Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok are at Tell Me a True Crime Story, and Twitter is at Tell Me a TCS Pod. And please, please, please write a review for the podcast and give it 5 stars. That would help me out so much. Also, please check out my other podcast, All Available Units Respond. That podcast covers interesting stories of disasters and catastrophes like structural collapses, massive fires, train derailments, plane accidents. If you like true crime, I think you will enjoy the stories on there too. And if you have people in your life that are firefighters, police officers, first responders, or retired from any of those professions, I think that they would enjoy the stories on that podcast. Again, it's called All Available Units Respond, and so far there are 4 episodes on there. Thank you again for being here. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Tune in again soon for episode 15 when I'll tell you another true crime story. Big hugs to all of you. Bye-bye.